Here. All right, welcome everybody to episode 51 of the Inglorious Bastards campaign. I don't know how iTunes is going to do it. This is essentially the first episode of season 2, so it's either episode 51 or the episode 1 of season 2. And I'm very excited tonight. I've been waiting since about November of 2018. Mostly it was my doing. It was a scheduling thing. But with us tonight, we have Dr. Corey Olsen. Most of you all probably know him as the Tolkien Professor, and I just want to give you a big welcome. Thank you for coming.
Hey, no problem. Good to be here.
So just a quick background. I'm going to give just a quick background on you, Corey, if that's okay. And I brushed up on this before you came on, just so I can make sure I get it right. So Corey has a BA from Williams College in English and Astrophysics, which is an interesting combination. And a PhD from Columbia University. Was that in medieval literature?
Yes, it was.
And he was on the faculty of Washington College for a while in the English department. And then, of course, he became the Tolkien Professor. He is the founder of Mythgard Institute and the founder of Signum University. And I'm really excited to have you here. So thank you again for coming. Is there anything that I left out? Anything that you want to talk about?
Oh, no, that's all good. And I'm really glad to be here. I think, the idea of your campaign is really cool. Very few people do much with the Book of Lost Tales stuff, and it's so, there's so much stuff in the Book of Lost Tales that is just like completely sort of off the radar, you know what I mean? It's really interesting. But the thing is, and it's one of the things that I've been noticing. So in the Mythgard Academy, which is the series of basically sort of online book club stuff that I've been doing through Mythgard since 2013 now, we just do discussions of books chapter by chapter, essentially, we've been going through the entire History of Middle-earth series together, reading that together and talking it through. We're in Sauron Defeated right now, Volume 9, talking about the Notion Club papers. We had a particularly difficult section of the Notion Club papers we were talking about this past Wednesday, just 2 days ago. But one of the things, like reading the whole, this is the first time I've ever carefully gone through the whole History of Middle-earth series, back to back to back. It's like a reference series. You usually don't read it cover to cover and back to back from one end to the next. So it's been really cool studying through that way. And one of the things that I keep finding is sometimes just when you think that one of the crazy ideas from the Book of Lost Tales that never appears again, or just when you think that clearly he must have changed his mind about that, and he went away from that, it'll crop up again, or something that implies that maybe actually, he's not talking about it anymore. He doesn't include it, he doesn't mention it in the stories, but maybe it's not even actually gone. These sort of mythic ideas that he kind of touches on and never explains, these concepts that he raises briefly, and then in later versions, especially once he started doing the style of writing that became the Silmarillion, and I don't mean the linguistic style. I mean the narrative style, right? Most of the Silmarillion is essentially a kind of plot summary, right? I mean, it's just kind of giving a big overview of these stories. Well, that's not where he started out. Right? The Book of Lost Tales is a very different kind of narrative. It's telling the story in much more detail. Very
much so, and I'm glad you went right into that. So the reason I asked Corey to come originally on the podcast was because his first 2 sessions on the Book of Lost Tales, essentially about the foreword and the first chapter, right, where Ariel encounters Lindo and Vare, goes to the Cottage of Lost Play. Those were so instrumental in me sort of forming the basis of the second part of this campaign. And it's strange because, and just bear with me here.
Okay.
For me, the first part of the campaign, our campaign, was in sort of Middle Earth proper, the
Right.
part that everybody knows, right?
Sure.
And in a sense, by moving forward in time from the character's point of view, I'm actually moving backwards in time in the mythos, right?
Yes.
And what's so cool about that, and in part 3, which I'll get to 50 episodes from now, I'm moving back even farther. So this part 2, where the characters end up coming to Tol Eressëa, the Lonely Isle, you get to meet some of the elves that are living there and that have been living there for a long time, since the island stopped moving around, right?
Right.
And so you get to meet these characters, and I think you touched on this at some point in one of those episodes where you learn about the history from these people sort of firsthand, from someone who's there to learn. So we're focused primarily on the Book of Lost Tales, the foreword, and sort of book 1, right? The Cottage of Lost Play.
Right. Yeah, Cottage of Lost Play. Sure.
So moving through there. So what I thought we'd do tonight, Corey, is we can talk a little bit about the Cottage of Lost Play. I have some vocabulary, I guess you were. I guess you could call it vocabulary and concepts. And I thought we could talk about them, and then we could play a little game where I could talk about some of the things that have happened in the campaign, and you can tell me as the expert, that Jared, that doesn't really work, and here's why. And I'm expecting that. I certainly won't take any offense to it, because I already sort of, having gone through, we did the campaign. We started the campaign almost 2 years ago, and already, going back through it, I'm noticing things that I did wrong, or facts that I got incorrect. So I just want to bring up one thing. When we first started talking, I was really excited to meet you, obviously, from listening to the podcast, but also we have a lot of other things in common, right? We're both fathers. We both live in New England, and we're both lifelong Dungeons and Dragons players.
That's right.
So can you tell us anything about, I am curious about sort of your D&D play, or if you still keep up with that at all.
Sure. Well, so I've been playing D&D since I was in high school, basically, was when I started playing D&D, and I was very active throughout college. I was kind of co-DMing a long campaign with a class of mine throughout our college years. I didn't play very much after that for a while, and I kind of put it aside for, throughout grad school and everything. I just didn't have time, didn't really know anybody who played anymore, and it was about maybe 15, 20 years went by. And, so I was playing, I think I was still playing 2nd edition in college. Back in the glorious days of Thacos and armor class -3 and all that kind of thing. So it was after the 5th edition came out. That I just kind of, sort of stumbled across it again. And finding it was like, it was like, stumbling on an oasis in the desert. I was like, oh, D&D, I haven't done this in so long. And my sons were old enough that I'm like, you know what, we could play. So I taught my kids to play.
Oh, that's awesome.
I got the 5th edition books, which I really quite like the 5th edition books. My first impulse, I'm like, maybe we can play 2nd edition. And I'm like, no, let's get into 5th edition. It's all good. So I started DMing some sort of short campaigns for my sons, basically, is what I've been doing lately. But I find it's one of the things that I just absolutely love thinking about. When I get the relatively rare times when I just get some free time just to kind of do something for fun, I will often go through and be like, how can I can I make up a homebrew table of how I love random tables. As a DM, it's one of my favorite things. My favorite thing in the world is to roll stuff on random tables and then make up the narrative that makes the crazy results you get from a random table fit. That's my favorite thing.
Absolutely.
All of D&D. So I love making up tables and things. So that's the kind of that's my very private sort of super geeky pleasure even now to like go through and make up random DM tables, which I never even actually use because I don't, but someday I might, it might come up. The situation may arise at some point in the future again when I'm able to sort of play in a campaign again. Who knows? But anyway, so that's kind of my history with D&D. I find it so invigorating, to be participating in a story that you are creating, that is kind of unfolding around you, in the way that happens. There are very few things. It's like there's like a kind of I love stories. I love narrative. As a teacher and as a professor, this is what I do, and this is what I love doing. And there's a kind of purity, to the narrative creation of like a story that is unfolding, that nobody knows what's going to happen, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen. And the story happens, and the story that emerges is a story unplanned and unforeseen by anyone in the party, right? And just that kind of experience is, I just find so delightful.
Well, the playing a D&D campaign in a Middle Earth setting was talking about some of the things you just mentioned, being able to weave that story in without like crapping all over everything Tolkien believed in, right? And that was important to me, So when I talk about these characters opened a portal to opened like a door to the void, they traveled across the straight road without being on one of Kieran's ships. Like, wait a minute. But we were, the Elendil Stone went right back to Tower Hills, right? Like, because that comes into the story again later, right? Like, we didn't kill off Gildor and Glorian, right? Like, he's still kicking around. And for the most part, our story stayed away from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings altogether. So, I'm really discovering my love for interviewing people. We've had some really great interviews with Chris Pearson and Jerry Snook from Lord of the Rings Online. A friend of yours, I know, Jacob Rogers from Cubicle 7.
So you've been using the Cubicle 7 adaptation, the D&D sort of Middle Earth skin thing?
So we did the adventures in Middle Earth loosely in the first part of the campaign, and as you can imagine, it's very low magic. Right. So by the second part of the campaign, I was a little more flexible. They have Cubicle 7 was great. They have a sheet in one of the books that says, if you're going to use magic, here are the spells we recommend, right? Like, don't really stray from this list because, otherwise you're going to break the game. Yeah. But anyway, so in interviewing people, I think, more than listening to my podcast, the reason people tune in is they're able to learn more about these people like yourself that they really come to love and have some sort of relationship with online, right? So if I might ask you, what was the genesis for the Tolkien Professor? Like where, and you can go as far back as you want. Like, when did you first discover Tolkien, and then how did that lead to what you do now?
Great. Yeah, well, that does put it back a bit. So I discovered Tolkien first when I was 8. And I was living at the time in rural West Virginia. My family had very few books, and neither of my parents are really readers anyway, very much. So I discovered Tolkien because my parents did know the Chronicles of Narnia, and they had just read me the Chronicles of Narnia, which I loved. And I had a cousin who had heard that I had just read the Chronicles of Narnia and loved it, so he gave me a copy of The Hobbit. Just basically said, if you really like the Chronicles of Narnia, you'll like this too. So I read that, and it was great. And after that, I don't even remember where I got exactly my first copy of The Lord of the Rings, or when. I'm pretty sure it was right afterwards, because basically, I remember receiving my copy of The Hobbit, and then I completely immersed myself in The Hobbit. And I don't even really remember my first reading of The Lord of the Rings, as a distinct experience in itself. Mostly because my first reading of The Lord of the Rings was immediately followed by my second reading of The Lord of the Rings. Yeah. I must have read them back to back to back, a whole bunch of times. And so that whole, it's funny. I mean, when I think, again, I can remember the time when I was introduced to Tolkien, but basically since then, I can't really kind of separate, the memory of my childhood from that time when I was really immersed in it. It's always been, reading it and rereading it has always been, a really central part of where I've been. It's funny, though, when I went to college, I didn't cease being a Tolkien fan. I totally fell in love with medieval literature, and that was, what I was. I was an English major, and I was studying medieval literature and loving that, and decided by my sophomore year that I wanted to go to grad school, and this was what I wanted to do. Went to grad school and studied medieval literature, and carried on being like a Tolkien reader on the side, having conversations with, the few other Tolkien fans that I encountered and everything. But I had like no strategy to introduce that into my professional life, basically, at all. It was just like, Tolkien is what I read in private, and medieval literature is what I taught and read and loved talking about, into classes and everything. And so, I got a tenure track job, down the road, and here I am in the seat that I got, sort of the faculty line that I was occupying, right? The guy who retired, whose position I got, had been he had been originally a Victorianist, and then their like Chaucer person had vanished. And so they made the Victorian guy like, hey, congratulations, you're teaching Chaucer now too. So he was teaching, he had been teaching some medieval literature kind of on the side for a while, but then he retired. And when he retired, they decided, okay, we're going to replace him with like a full medievalist. And so that was my position. So therefore, I was charged by our department chair with developing some new medieval literature classes, because there had only been a couple things on the books that this other guy had been doing kind of half-time, right? So I was like, okay, and so I'm brainstorming, like, what courses would I want to teach? And I'm like, well, I'll do an Arthurian lit class. That's a no-brainer, right? Okay, so we're doing that. And we've got the Chaucer class, and maybe some more Middle English stuff we can do. And then I was just like, hey, wait a second. I could teach a Tolkien class. That would be, and literally, like, until that day, it had never, like, I think I can honestly say, throughout my years in graduate school, I had never once even thought of that. Like, I don't even know why. I'm just really good at compartmentalizing, I guess. But I was like, hey, I could do a Tolkien class. So I did a Tolkien class at Washington College a couple times. And it was, of course, really popular. Tolkien classes always are. And so, that kind of opened the door, essentially, for Tolkien to come into my professional life, right? Like, that compartmentalization sort of went down. So here I was, somebody who had never been a Tolkien scholar in the sense of like doing Tolkien in my official scholarship, right? I was a literary scholar and a medieval scholar, who had read Tolkien, all of his life. So all of a sudden I'm like, hey, this is a thing that I can do. So I started writing, and I published an article on Tolkien and was sort of preparing to write more. But this was a point at which I had a kind of existential crisis in I think it was my third year as a professor. And my crisis sort of went like this. And I don't mean this as many people might feel differently from me. But anyway, this is how I felt. How I felt was, gosh, this scholarly publishing thing feels like a bit of a waste of time. That like here I'm pouring all of this work and effort into writing these things, which, like, 50 people are ever going to read, right? And most of them aren't even necessarily going to be real interested in it, right? I was feeling like, I was a little frustrated by the way that I felt like the scholarly community was like very inward focused, right? Like there's a big world out there, and we're all just like writing these things that we publish in these journals, which nobody reads but us, right? And the kids.
It's an echo chamber.
Huh?
It's an echo chamber in some ways.
Exactly. Well, I mean, and it's not. I don't mean it as a criticism of the thing. It just, to me, it wasn't very fulfilling, right? My classroom teaching was like 10 times as fulfilling to me as writing these articles. Mm-hmm. Because I'm like, frankly, in 2 classes, I'm reaching more people than I'm probably reaching with that article that I spent all that time on, like that I'm ever going to reach with that, because it's only a handful of people ever going to read it. And of course, this felt especially silly when I started to work on publishing Tolkien stuff. Because I said to myself innocently, there are like hundreds, maybe even thousands of people out there who would be interested, to read and talk about this, right? This is something which could easily, one could easily talk about to a more general audience, and not just, in this closed chamber, of scholarly conversation. So that was the original impetus behind my podcast. So I said, okay, you know what? Instead of writing this next article, because I was thinking about The Hobbit, and I was thinking about writing something on The Hobbit, and I was like, well, you know what? I'm just going to do a set of lectures on The Hobbit, and I'm going to put them online somehow.
Was this back in 2009?
Yeah, well, 2007 was actually when I had the idea. Okay. That was when I first was like, okay, but I didn't really know how to do it. Like, I kind of built my own website. I got the domain, TolkienProfessor.com. And the Tolkien Professor, basically that was just me trying to choose a name that was like as transparent and descriptive as possible. Like, the subject I am discussing is Tolkien, and I am a professor. Like, that was really what I was trying to communicate. Like, because I wanted to warn people, like, be warned. These are going to be like lectures from an academic, right? So, like, if that's not your bag, you might not like this. And it's about Tolkien. So I felt like those are the two things people needed to know. The problem was always the fact, like, the stress which I did not at the time anticipate that would be laid upon the definite article at the beginning of it. And there are some other scholars, Mike Drought in particular, who never loses a chance to give me a hard time for calling myself the Tolkien Professor, as if I'm the only one.
He's actually coming on the podcast in October.
Awesome. Yeah, he's a great guy, a fantastic scholar. And as I say, always teases me with every opportunity he gets about the definite article in the title. But again, originally it was just my URL, like TolkienProfessor.com.
Hey, that's good marketing. That's good marketing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, it's clear. It's so I came up with that name, with that URL, and I'm like, hey, awesome. So, but again, I really didn't have any idea how to package it. I didn't listen to podcasts at all myself, and this was still pretty early on. I mean, 2007 was still pretty early on in that whole world. Not the very beginning, but still pretty early on. So, but then, like, I was, junior faculty member, other things kind of came and swept it aside for a couple of years. So it was in the summer of 2009 that I finally settled on a podcast and started the podcast stuff officially and kind of moved forward with it. I had recorded, back in the fall of 2007, I had recorded that very first episode, the How to Read Tolkien and Why episode, and I had recorded the first two, I think, lectures in the Hobbit series, my very first Hobbit series, before I had set it aside. So I posted those as the first three episodes of the podcast and went to continue the Hobbit thing from there. And it was just one of those things where, like, I had like 5 listeners, for a few weeks until one day I'll never forget that morning when I came downstairs and just kind of looked at my download stats, just to see because I didn't have any access. Apple was always very bad, and still is actually very bad at giving any kind of stats or information about iTunes stuff. So all I was able to do was just basically extrapolate from the amount of bandwidth that had been used from my server, for how many downloads we had. And normally, I was coming in at about 200 to 400 total downloads at this one. Then I went down this next morning and saw that I had like 15,000, and I was like,
what happened?
What happened was they had put me on their new and notable list.
Oh.
One of the iTunes editors like found it and liked it and put it on the new and notable. And I was like, whoa! And that was like
your server crashed, and
yeah, exactly. That was sort of the beginning of things. And of course, I swiftly found that the number of people out there that would be interested in talking about Tolkien stuff was neither hundreds nor thousands, but indeed hundreds of thousands of people who really were interested in talking about stuff. And I don't even remember exactly, within a couple of years, several million downloads. And it was just, I mean, what I found, the excitement, the real hunger for academic content, people who had been out of school for a while and, had not had something to, Tolkien fans who are out working in like engineering fields or whatever, and had not been.
Or astrophysics.
For example, exactly. People, yeah. But so, by the way, the explanation of the astrophysics degree, I was an English physics double major. Those are the two things that I really loved. And that moment in the second half of my sophomore year, when I decided, okay, English is what I really want to do. I'm going to go pro in English, and so I basically had to take a long look at it and say, you know what, the demands of the physics major, like the kinds of things that I know you have to do to complete the physics major, like I can't commit to that because I really want to focus on English stuff. So I was grudgingly going to drop the physics major entirely, but then for the last second, I realized I was only like 2 courses shy of completing the astrophysics major by coincidence, because I'd taken a couple astronomy classes already. And I was like, sweet, so if I just take 2 more classes, I can finish the astrophysics major. So the astrophysics major was actually a cop-out on my part.
I've never heard anyone say that about astrophysics before.
Yeah. But the perk is that it sounded even cooler. So I was like, okay, it's good. But I mean, I had done several astronomy classes as well as a bunch of physics. So it was really great. But no, I've always loved math and physics. It's always been throughout my high school career, especially. I was like, I loved English most, but I was better at math and science.
So that's exactly how I was.